A month or so ago, I was contacted by Games Workshop with a message regarding the upcoming Warhammer World Store Anniversary. They were planning to run a huge participation game and needed some miniatures built and painted for it, which is where myself and some other content creators came in. We were each given a unit and tasked with completing them to form 2 full armies of Necrons and Ultramarines. I was assigned a unit of jump pack intercessors, and the only instructions I was given was to paint them as Ultramarines and keep to their normal loadouts. So we all know what I did. I created my own custom unit based on the jump pack intercessors. Now when it comes to the Ultramarines, we are much more limited on how we can craft custom units. As strict adherence to the Codex Astartes, it's rare to find the specialised squads that other chapters employ. Beyond the Victrix Guard and the odd Tyrannic War Veteran, their strict rules don't give us much wiggle room to remain lore-friendly. And while I pondered this issue, I set about prepping all of my torsos, legs and jump packs. To keep the specific components for each of the 5 Marines together, I employed the project box from Artus Opus, which was designed by myself and the folks at AO. It helps to keep my parts organised as I build, and should I need a break, I can close up the box and keep everything safe. It's made from wood, has a felt lining, removable separators, and this beautiful black finish inlaid with my Spare Parts Emporium logo. I'll include some links as to where you can pick these up down below. Now, once I'd finished prepping everything, I finally had an idea of how I could build a custom unit whilst also not straying too far from the lore. And that idea was to kind of recreate one of my first ever kit bashes. Back when the 4th edition of Codex Space Marines was released, I picked up the new, at the time, plastic captain kit and a squad of tactical marines. Then, using a combination of the two, I built some veteran Space Marines. This was back before we had separate Stern Guard and Vanguard veterans. So with this in mind, I started out by grabbing the new Ultramarine upgrade box and made a start on my own veteran jump pack intercessor sergeant. From this kit, I removed the power sword arm and sheath before gluing them to one of the torsos. Following this, the rest of the squad was equipped with the usual loadouts. So far, so normal. But my idea for this veteran squad was to create more of a unit that I dubbed the Praetorian Skyguard. These are less a custom unit and more of a specific group of veteran Marines who are more likely to accompany similarly equipped officers' units like captains and chaplains. The first real deviation from the regular kit that I made was to use the Ultramarine upgrade sprue again, but instead of using the Tactica shoulder pads, I instead opted to use the smaller Phobos pads. The Sergeant used a chunkier variant, but the use of the sleeker Phobos design was an idea I first employed on my Raptors. The lightweight design lends itself well to the faster, more rapid movement speed of the jump pack intercessors. For the Sergeant's head, I looked towards the Space Marine heads kit and selected this helmet with this important looking plume, but for the rest of the squad I wanted something that would help the squad stand out a little more from the rank and file, which landed me on using the winged helmets from the Victrix Guard. These are not only recognisable as being Ultramarine coded, but the wings also lend themselves to the aerial nature of the unit. Now, rather than gluing the heads to the torsos at this stage, I did decide to keep the helmet separate from the rest of the armour. This was to make things a little easier to paint later on, and to help me hold them, I drilled some 1mm holes into the neck and glued some 1mm steel wire into them to create a simple holder. As a way of adding a little more aerial flair to my unit, I decided to source several feathers from the Dark Angels upgrade sprue. My thinking here was that the feathers are taken from a bird of prey native to the mountain ranges of Macragge. Some of these pieces did need to be removed from larger pieces, and for the tilt shield I needed to remove the embossed symbol using my knife. With a few feathers sourced, these were glued across the unit. To finish off, I added more tilt shields taken from the Ultramarine upgrade sprue and various Primaris kits before attaching a few purity seals and reliquies to really cement that veteran status. Now, in terms of kit bashing, I kept things fairly mild. Partly this was to not overstep too far and make this unit unrecognisable as jump pack intercessors on the tabletop. The other reason was that, due to a few scheduling issues, I only had a couple of days to complete the squad in time for them to be ready for the big game. This time crunch also meant that I had to approach the painting in a slightly different way to how I would normally paint as well. To start out, I began with a black primer. Normally, I would opt for a blue primer to help speed up the process, but my plan here was to focus a little more of my limited time to the iconic Ultramarine blue. This colour would, after all, be the most visible from a distance. So with this in mind, I gave the armour a coat of marine blue from the Toothing Coats range. I applied this with my airbrush, which allowed me to form some gradients between the black primer and the blue. The darker areas were kept to the shadows, with the lighter, more exposed points being coated in the blue. To push the gradients a little further, I mixed in some celestial blue to my marine blue to create a slightly lighter shade. This was then applied to those more exposed areas again, places like the tops of the jump packs, shoulders and gorgets for example. This built upon the previous gradient and helped to emphasize a few of the more pronounced details. From here, I then gave the entire armour a coat of airbrush thinned Talassar Blue contrast paint. Due to the transparent nature of the paint, it helped to boost the intensity of the blue, whilst also helping to smooth out the blends between the layers. For the next couple of steps, I didn't really need to use the airbrush, but it just helped me to speed up the paint application. For the Victrix Guard helmets, I gave them all a coat of Carcharadon Grey, before using some Sanguine Scarlet across the Veteran Sergeant's helmet. From here, I then returned to the regular brush application and gave all of the steel areas of the models a base coat using some Surcoat Silver. As with all of my subsequent base coats, I made sure to mix in a little water to my paint before applying a couple of coats to ensure the best coverage. This was followed by some Dragon's Gold that I used to paint all of the decorative emblems and reliquaries. Next, I used some Doom Death Black to pick out all the straps, pouches, pipes and segments between the armour panels, before returning to Carcharadon Grey to paint the shoulder trims and parts of the Veteran Sergeant's helmet. To paint the feathers that I dotted about, along with the parchment and skulls on the base, I used some Ancient Forest, and gave the concrete slabs that the squad are jumping off a coat of Dungeon Stone Grey, completing the base coats. From here, I could start to add some shading to the recesses of the base coated areas, and the first of these was Tempest Blue. I heavily thinned this down with some airbrush thinner before applying it over my Carcharadon Grey painted areas. This created a very subtle blue shading in the recesses of these areas, just enough to help add a little more definition to the details. The following washes were a little more straightforward. I applied Flesh Wash across the gold details, Oblivion Black Wash over the steel details, and Battle Mud Wash across the parchment, feathers, and red areas. This brought me neatly to the highlights. This is where I managed to save quite a bit of time by severely limiting where I highlighted and how much I highlighted. I decided to focus mainly on key areas such as the white details, where I used some White Star to pick out the edges. I also picked out just a few of the most prominent edges of the armour with some Celestial Blue. And if there were any other details that I felt were looking a little flat, I simply mixed in a little White Star to my original base coat before applying a sparing highlight. This then saw me finishing off the painting by picking out the eye lenses with some Emerald Green. At this stage, I found myself with a little more extra time than expected, so I decided to add some transfers, but first I had to prep the areas that I intended to add them to. This was done by coating the shoulder pads and tilt shields with a coat of gloss varnish to create a nice, smooth surface to add my transfers to. The transfers in question were also taken from the Ultramarine upgrade sprue. These were cut away from the sheet, dipped in water and left until they were starting to peel away from the backing paper. At this point, the decals were carefully pulled away from the paper and into place with a damp brush. Then, to help the transfers form to the curved surfaces, I then applied some Microsol over the top. This softens the transfers, allowing them to stick more closely to the surface, resulting in that painted-on look. With the transfers in place, I removed the wire holders, cleaned up the contact points, and glued together all of the parts. Some AK Dark Earth paste was then painted onto the base was cleaned up with a black acrylic marker, and then everything was given a coat of matte varnish. This both protected the paintwork, removed the glossiness created by the washes, and sealed the decals in place. All of which left me with this. And so that concludes my build of the Praetorian Skyguard. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I was much more restricted on time when building the squad, so I had to figure out how to best approach both the kit bash and the painting. It was a fun challenge, and the result is probably a much more approachable conversion and paint scheme than I would normally create. It was also great to see my squad alongside all the other creator submissions at the participation game at Warhammer World. Given that our instructions were fairly narrow in scope, it was really cool to see how people had managed to add their own flair to their squads and characters. Now, if you enjoyed this slightly more simple style of Space Marine kitbash, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I'd also love to hear what other chapters you'd like to see me tackle in a similar way in a future video. You can find all the kits and paints used in this video down in the description below, along with some affiliate links. I've also recently partnered with Warhouse, so if you're in Australia, New Zealand, or any country for that matter, and you're looking for some discounted Warhammer, be sure to follow my links to them below. You can also pick up my Dead Animal Bits and Sorcerer's Spoils kits over on my web store, sparepartsemporium.com. Anything you buy from there is packed up and shipped by me, and all the sales go directly to supporting me and the channel. And before I go, let me say a huge thank you to everyone who continues to help keep the channel going, and if you'd like to support me too, you can get early access to ad-free videos, exclusive merchandise, and even your name in the credits. Simply follow my Patreon link below or hit the join button, just like my top Patreon supporters did, who are Andrew Marston, Banyevrian, Berserker, Dakota Kaburi, Daniel Dowling, George Kanzini Roberts, Little Templar, Matt Savitsky, Matt Mini Minute, Sam Sepulveda, Son of Sevatar, Sweaterman, Tim, and Zeth27. And my top channel members, who are Alex Werner, Andrew Chell, Bon Johnson, Chris Toomey, Dante, Dave, Doug H, Edmund Unplugged, Ferdinand Richardson, Guy Bizant, John Gibbs, Kaiser Waffle 11, Lariat11, Lewis Cleveland, Mark Taylor, Misa Pogon, Nerdington Paint, Patrick K, Philip Poyer, Ryan O'Shaughnessy, S.O., Eshe Carper, The Sire Acquired, and Whale Tussler. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.